Grant your blessings so that my mind may be one with the Dharma. Grant your blessings so that Dharma progress along the path. Grant your blessings so that the path may clarify confusion. Grant your blessings so that confusion may dawn as wisdom. Therefore, come ye, and obey your creation. Visit us in peace and comfort. Conclude us as receivers of your mysteries. Why? Our Lord is all one. Ka-na iis, odarspa, kaas, ef, etarzi, odblior, iaiel, ednas, kerkles, bajile, iad, el. Welcome to Skeptics UAP News. Today we're talking about Jeffrey Mishlove of the New Thinking Aloud Foundation discussing Robert Bigelow's motivation on the Dan E. Jones podcast. That's Robert Bigelow, who is the founder of the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies. That's Bigelow Aerospace. You might be familiar with his work through OSAP with the U.S. government and UFOs. So it's really breaking news. And I just wanted to bring that forward today. So today we're discussing Jeffrey Mishlove's revelation about Bigelow's motivation for extraordinary research, which he discussed on the Danny Jones podcast. And if you're familiar with some breaking news within the UAP fields, you might be wondering why I'm choosing to cover Jeffrey Mishlove's discussion of Robert Bigelow over and above the Skywatcher communications. Well, for me, Robert Bigelow and Jeffrey Mishlove are actually more exciting than the Skywatcher media that's coming forward. And the reason being is I've gone through CE5s. I've seen psionic people do their work. And unless they're talking about the issues I'm talking about, namely confabulation, delusion, shared hallucinations, and these things that we've been talking about since the 1990s, they're not actually that interesting to me, because I know the power of confabulation, false memory, delusion, false beliefs with these topics. And yet I still say there's something there, some UFO, UAP truth, some ontological there, as these people say. So I say it's more exciting than Skywatcher because Robert Bigelow's been in this since the 80s, right? Since probably before that, and is the reason why things like Skywatcher and Gary Nolan and the Soul Foundation can actually be here. This Robert Bigelow, National Institute for Discovery Science, and his work with unusual personal experiences, alien abduction research, is the reason why all of this psionic context actually exists. And so when I hear that Jeffrey Mishlove is talking about Robert Bigelow and I might receive a little bit of new information about him, I think that's more exciting than Jake Barber, Gary Nolan, and their team going out and looking at what seems to me to be anomalies in the sky and perhaps not necessarily true and certified UFOs as vehicles of extraordinary occupants, let's say. So let's get into it. We've got a lot to go through today, and will hopefully build up this context. So yeah, this is Robert Bigelow. If you've been watching Skeptics UAP News with me, you'll be aware of this slide. This is Robert Bigelow. He's speaking in front of a sign that says Bigelow Aerospace. Unusual Personal Experiences is a booklet. And I say this one booklet, Unusual Personal Experiences, which was funded and published by the Bigelow Holding Corporation in association with Hans Adam II, Prince of Liechtenstein. This conducted a survey of nationwide survey, and it established the understanding that about 2% of people may experience the UFO abduction syndrome. They sent this information out to 100,000 mental health workers and used this information as a basis for engaging nationwide series of conferences, after which the National Institute for Discovery Science was set up, after which, right, you will see Bigelow Aerospace. And so this one document is really the turning point, let's say, from alien abduction as a kind of folklore, alien abduction as an urban legend, to alien abduction as something that credentialed people talk about. And it used the credentials of John E. Mack, the head of Harvard psychiatry, to introduce all of these things to the public. And so there's a lot to say about it, and I've been exploring that for quite some time. So let's skip, and we'll cover all of that as we go forward. So yeah, this is the 2017 New York Times article. You might be really familiar with it. This is the reason why my PhD program at California Institute for Human Sciences actually exists. This article is the reason. It's because it established a sense of credibility about the topic and something, hey, we actually need to study it. Notice that it was written by Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean. Now, Leslie Kean is going to be really important coming up later in the presentation. So we're sort of parsing all of this out. Now, we'll just keep going. This is the image of the thumbnail on Danny Jones. Dr. Mishlove's on there, and it reads Psychic Spies, Scientology, and Best Evidence for UFOs for Life After Death, excuse me. So very provocative title, right? This comes on the Danny Jones podcast, and I've been watching Danny Jones podcast since I saw Chris Bledsoe, who's the gentleman in the middle here of the slide, talk on Danny Jones, and he made claims about a UFO sighting I was tracking. He made such strong claims that it triggered me to reach out to a government expert, right? Chris Bledsoe went on the Danny Jones podcast and basically said, hey, we all went to the Robert Monroe Institute, for a psionic event with UAP conscious contact. And so we all tried to do it. There were a dozen people or so there, including Dr. Sean Esbjorn Hargens, who you see in the image above. He was there too. And they all went out, did CE5 psionic summoning of UFOs. They didn't see it for about a week. My friend and first client, Dan Berg, was also there. He was invited as a prime contactee. And if you know about psionics in UFOology or whatever, there's lore that there are prime contactees, that if you want to actually have a psionic event happen, you actually need to have a psionic asset there. These prime contactees, these CE5 people who can really summon these orbs, are treated like talent, let's say, and sometimes used. And so that was the context in which my friend and first client, Dan Berg, was invited to this thing. Dan Berg is a cameraman for the Rob Freeman UFO World Explorer crew. They travel around with $250,000 worth of equipment. They film these things in the sky. And so Chris Bledsoe went on the Danny Jones podcast to discuss this one sighting at the Monroe Institute that Sean Esbjorn Hargens was part of, that Darren King, another academic in the field, was part of, that Elizondo was supposed to be there but sent his representative, Sean Cahill. These are all things that people have publicly discussed in the public record. So I'm not revealing anything out of confidence, but I'm just saying, hey, this is a thing. This was a really big sighting for me because I spent 40 to 80 hours or more just exploring it as a potential for SETI style communication. If you know me, I've been all about geometric communications through UFOs, dreams, and body marks, right? So I was like, this is the primary candidate I am working with to bring forward this hypothesis because all these people said it was legit, and there's a lot of good footage, etc. Turns out it was a satellite, and I was pretty sure it was a satellite, but then Chris Bledsoe went on the Danny Jones podcast and really put forward these strong claims that he was being studied by government scientists. And those were the claims I took umbrage with, let's say. Not that he was seeing aliens or angels or whatever else. I go, if he's actually working with government scientists, they would actually know what government scientists know, which would be this is a satellite, not a psionic summoning of an angel. But he didn't work with government scientists, although he slapped the name John Alexander and Jim Semivan, intelligence community individuals, on his book. And we all go, oh, that's good enough. They're spies. They probably know what they're doing. They probably know what a satellite is versus a UFO. That's what I did. But Bledsoe gets on the Danny Jones podcast and talks about government scientists there. And I go, no, actually, this isn't right. These claims are not right. In part because Dr. Sean S. Bjornhargis, this is my feeling, he's doing a super experiencer study looking at 5,000 people that are experiencers, and he uses Chris Bledsoe as a primary case study and as an advisor to the study. So I'm going, there's something fishy going on here. I'm not sure what it is, what's going on. Bledsoe's making wild claims about government scientists. I'm in an integral noetic science program. The director is looking to Bledsoe as an example and as an advisor, but we're not integrating objective science into this conversation. So that's an issue. And so that cued me off on a course of action, which I contacted a true government scientist, Dr. Michael Earle, who wrote his thesis on rotating satellites. He works for the Royal Canadian Military College and teaches space surveillance stuff. And so he really knew what it was. He identified it very quickly and easily as a rotating satellite and likely Intelsat 29E. So equipped with that, I communicated with everyone, and that set off the journey for Skeptics UAP News. So Danny Jones' podcast is woven into my history here in presenting topics to Sun. So that's why I was cued off on this. Now we've got Danny Sheehan in the bottom. That was another inspiration for me. Danny Sheehan made wild claims about Johnny Mack on the Danny Jones podcast. His wild claims go, John Mack never performed hypnosis. I know for a fact John Mack did perform hypnosis. And so why is it appropriate for the lawyer for Johnny Mack to not know that Johnny Mack performed hypnosis? Did Danny Sheehan not read Abduction or Passport to the Cosmos? Did he not read these documents? And that's the question I have today in 2025, despite the fact that Danny Sheehan represented Johnny Mack in the 90s and stuff like that for his Harvard Inquisition experience. So then I go, actually, whatever Danny Sheehan says about this after the context of this blatant lie on the Danny Jones podcast, I can't trust. And so that was another moment where I moved into this more skeptical perspective. So I love all of these guys on the screen. Don't get me wrong. So that's the one thing that I'm kind of committed to bringing forward, right? Like I'm bringing forward my issues because I believe these guys are respectable, that have an authentic inquiry, and that they're integrating skeptical perspectives and willing to. And so that's in part why I'm bringing forward these criticisms, because I respect them. And I believe that any inquiry here is dialectical, meaning you offer a perspective, people respond, you integrate it. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'd invite the community to do. And I know it's sometimes triggering because we're dealing with articles of faith and worldview. And that's really triggering and triggered for some people. So the Danny Jones podcast, I'm just shouting out about it, saying, hey, this is a big deal. This is why I'm looking at it. He has really long interviews with these people who feel really comfortable and reveal things, right? All right, so this is Jeffrey Mishlove, right? I'm introducing Mishlove. Now, notice he's got a beautiful lapel pin, right? We all love that, right? It attracts a lot of drala. one might say, in the Tibetan Buddhist lineage of Shambhala Buddhism. So that working comes from Trungpa Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, right? So he was a Eastern Tibetan monk that came out of the Tibetan exiles and started teaching in the West. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because Jeffrey Mishlove appears to me to have integrated many of the teachings of Trungpa Rinpoche into his organization and has really used a number of these sort of mindfulness, almost magical practices to establish a presence here that is one of gravity and significance and of benefit, I would say. And so I'm grateful for that bringing forward of a tradition that I was deeply involved with, which was the Shambhala Buddhist tradition. They taught me a lot, and I'm really glad to see someone embodying those perspectives, even if I don't actually know if Mishlove worked with Trungpa Rinpoche. But I see sort of the fingerprints of that presence here, and so I'm acknowledging that. And that, in part, is why I begin my the sun presentations with the Buddhist chants and end it with a Buddhist chants, because it really holds a space. And so I feel that from Mishlove, even though I haven't done a tremendous amount of research about Mishlove's background with Shambhala Buddhism. That background also triggers me. And so the reason why I'm naming that here is because Trungpa Rinpoche was an abuser, sexual abuse, right? That sort of thing. His replacement was the Vajra regent gave aids to his students through sexual abuse sort of situations or whatever. And the same thing happened with Sakyong Mipam Rinpoche. I'm no longer a practicing Shambhala Buddhist, although I still hold my Buddhist vows. I am looking to practices, the magical practices, like equivalent to the Vajrayana in Western traditions. And so that's another reason why I'm approaching these topics. And this is this is why, right, we have to look at these things, because I go, okay, what is actually going on here? What is actually going on? And that's in part what we're doing here. We're asking questions. What is going on? And we're kind of diving deeply into that. So thanks for being here. All right. We are introducing the topic. We are going to listen to some of that interview with Mishlove and Danny Jones about Bigelow. But first, I wanted to introduce, this is Bigelow Aerospace's homepage as of today. I screenshotted the clock. I love this webpage because it explains Bigelow Aerospace, which is a company that was going to build inflatable habitats for space stations, right? Like, they got a really bad deal in COVID and had to shut down, but their technology is coming forward in other contracts. So I feel really sort of, I really, looking at Bigelow's discussion of what happened, I'm really impressed by his capacity as a person to emotionally metabolize these challenges in the world. But the reason why this is interesting to me is at the top, there's a notice. Hey, Bigelow's going on Mishlove's New Thinking Out Loud program. Wow, this is the last update to the Bigelow Aerospace webpage that I've seen, right? And it's been there for a year and a half, since September 10th, which is my mother's birthday, 2023, which was when the live stream with Mishlove happened. And that notice is still there, right? It's still there, which tells me so much about who Bigelow is, what he cares about, and how he executes in the world. And I have conclusions around that, or thoughts around that, but I just wanted to share that. So this is an image of the live stream. It says, investigating the paranormal live stream event with Robert Bigelow. He answered questions. He talked to Jeffrey Mishlove about it. I enjoyed watching this. So yeah, check that out. September 10th, 2023. It is now April 8th, 2025. This is like a year and a half, right? For someone who ran the only known UFO study program, right? Like, this is it. This is it. This is where it comes from. This is the type of thing that we're talking about when we're talking about the UFO studies by the government. This is their contractor. This is what they did. How is this possible? Is the question I'm asking, and why my kind of exploration of this reveals a kind of understanding of who perhaps these people are, at least in this sort of very distant kind of perceiving way, right? So let's start introducing more aspects of who Robert Bigelow is through his work. So as you probably know, Mishlove is the essay winner for Bigelow's Institute for Consciousness Studies essay contest. Right. So this is an example. This is a screenshot of Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies homepage. And as you see on the right, there's a major announcement. BIX is now a wholly owned subsidiary of the R.T. Bigelow Educational Foundation. The R.T. Bigelow Educational Foundation will be a huge source of funding going into the future. And I've seen this for, I don't know, half a year, maybe more on his webpage. So this is it. There are two things that the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies is talking about on the homepage. First thing is the challenge program. They ask the question, has the spirit world failed humanity? So I'll just read this slide to you. In 2023, BIX issued a groundbreaking challenge to the spirit world. 67 hand-picked certified mediums comprising 6 teams in 3 countries were funded $390,000 over a 9-month period to connect with the afterlife to answer the question, has the spirit world failed to enhance human spirituality on Earth since 1857, as evidenced by the dramatic rise in wars, violence, and uncontrolled technology at the expense of human spirituality? Right? Like, wow, I'm so fascinated. $500,000 to answer this question through a systematic means, right? This person really does believe in the spirit world, or at least the possibilities. It's wondering, has the spirit world failed us? And it says this is a challenge. I like this. I like this guy. Asking questions to receive a transformation, perhaps a challenging question to receive transformation. And so now I know for a fact, now having seen that this is an output of Bigelow Institute of Consciousness Studies, and this is actually an expression of the psychology of Robert Bigelow, that he perhaps understands the value of challenging questions that produce public documentation, and may understand my motivations for asking questions about him in a public way. So this gives us context as to why. Now, we should actually just jump into this, right? And I'm hoping this comes through. Yep. So we've got some reports, and I know we've got some reports. I'm just going to read these through. I know my aspect ratio on my presentation window is a little bit off, and I'm not going to fix it. So there are final reports published here. There's an examination of wisdom consistencies ostensibly communicated to accredited mediums from the spirit realm. Let's click on to that and see what's going on, right? There's an abstract that concludes, however, none were judged to be particularly compelling or conclusive. No conclusions were reached regarding the questions that asked for predictive information, as only physical time will tell if statements have any veracity, right? So, there's methodologies, there's conclusions. I haven't gone through these, perhaps. There's an investigation into current status of spiritual progress of humanity as ascertained by interviewing 19 mediums. There's also asking the other side, employing experienced mental mediums to question disincarnate wise sources. So what's really important here, right, is we've got this understanding that we're working with mediums in a systematic way, right? There's assessments, there's all sorts of stuff happening, right? So we are working with mediums in a systematic way. These are people who are understood to be psionic assets. They're equivalent of UFO summoners for the spirit world. And so this is an example of how a question might be systematically asked and answered, right? This is actually like logistically, how do you do it, right? Some people ask these questions like, is there life after death? What does my grandma have to say? And they go to a medium, they get an answer, they feel good. No, Robert Bigelow doesn't do that. He put almost $500,000 into this, had 65 mediums, and did something systematic, right? Like, wow, okay, so that's showing us not just motivation, but capacity, operational activities, and things like that. So I'm sharing this as an example for what he's done recently for the spirit world. I just asked the question, what has he done with alien abduction, UFO contact, and non-human intelligences in 3 decades of no one funded work? Like, wow, that's a really big question I have on my heart, and I'd love to have an answer, but I get gleams through the public discourse about what, why, and how. So I'm sharing that with you now. The second thing Bix put forward was the 2021 essay contest. And so let's just read what they have to say about the essay contest. It's judging the evidence for life after death. Now, this is important because we will discuss this essay contest in the context of Danny Jones and Mishlove discussing this essay contest. So the winners were chosen based on the power of the arguments presented and how persuasively the essays made the case for the survival of human consciousness beyond a reasonable doubt. The contest was judged by 7 independent judges. There was no influence from Robert Bigelow or Bick's staff on the judging process. The essays were chosen by a majority rule, with central criterion being the cumulative evidence beyond a reasonable doubt for survival of consciousness after permanent bodily death, right? And so we'll talk about that. I'm actually going to click in a little bit. Never mind. Oops. Let's keep going. All right, so I wanted to read this part. This is what I'm getting to. Life after death. Life after death essay contest winners. The winners were chosen based on the power of arguments. Oh yeah, I did that. Excuse me. No, this was let's start over on this page. So we're talking about the Bix essay contest, and it says the life after death essay contest winners. The winners were chosen based on the power of the arguments presented and on how persuasively the essays made the case for survival of human consciousness beyond a reasonable doubt, as though you were in a courtroom. While the judges were reading and rereading the 204 submitted essays, they were conscious of the great responsibility of choosing the top 3. The judges chose these principal winners with exquisite care. So there's 3 winners. We've got, let me read that. We've got the 7 contest judges. Let's click in onto that. Leslie Kean is one of them. Kit Green is another one. Let's talk about that. We've got Hal Putoff, who is important, and we'll talk about him coming up. We've got Brian Weiss. I'm so glad he's there. He's not necessarily really connected with UFO stuff. We've got Kreipel, who's definitely connected with Mac. We've got Jessica Utz, who I love her. I love her work on statistics, and I'm not sure very much about Diane. Archangel. Wow, that's a cool name. So we've got now, where do we get to the winners? Winners. Let's see. Well, let's keep going. We've got Jeffrey Mishlove, who got $500,000. This guy in the middle got about $350,000, and I'm not sure how much the guy on the other end got, but it's like a good portion of $1 million. So that's really important. That's how Bigelow and Mishlove are really connected. Mishlove actually was Bigelow was actually thinking of Mishlove in forming this contest. So it's sort of, even though there was no influence, we know through this conversation on Danny Jones that Bigelow was actually thinking of Mishlove in this case. So we'll keep going to discuss Robert Bigelow and Diane Bigelow funding a $3.7 million gift that forms the Bigelow Chair of Consciousness Studies at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Right, so that's a bunch of money to support consciousness studies. And I think if you keep looking into Robert Bigelow, you will keep seeing records and receipts of funding of consciousness studies and these things. And I think that's amazing. Such as the National Institute for Discovery Science, right? So this, well, it is operated from 1995 to 2004. It talks about Cole Keller on this page. This is from Wikipedia. Just to give you a sense, this was really a thing. There were a lot of things funded through here. There's a lot of resources, you can find online. And here's a quote that is often associated with NDEs, which is, "We don't study aliens, we study anomalies. They're the same thing in a lot of people's mind, but not in our minds." And that was helpful for me to understand where and how research was being done. So next up, we're talking about is the association of SETI, dreams, geometry, and Kona blue. And so you might know of SETI by entanglement if you've been with me on my journey. And I talk about it a lot because this is the only peer-reviewed paper that discusses dream telepathy in the context of SETI. This is my fundamental hypothesis. This is what I'm working on. This is what I've worked on since 2012. This is why I did the Book of Galactic Light. This is everything. This is the reason why I do my work, is because I believe that there is such a thing as dream telepathy, that it is non-local, and that you can interact with ontologically real and distinct entities through your dreams. It happened through like sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, all of that stuff. I don't push aside the dream understanding as to what these things are, because I believe that if we understand that sleep paralysis is more than a hypnagogic hallucination or the entity encounters, but acts through the kind of physiological, neurological sleep paralysis experience, that we would understand it at a much deeper level. I don't think Gary Nolan understands it. You can see my last video with about Jacques Vallée, is his bedroom encounters. I don't think these people get that. I don't think a lot of these people understand that if an encounter happens in a bedroom and there is symptoms of sleep paralysis, we're actually dealing with a cause, a source of causation within the human system, in addition to the NHI system. And we need to really elaborate that understanding first and foremost through discussions on confabulation, delusion, hallucinations, etc., that I don't see happening in the context of Skywatcher, which is why I'm interested in Robert Bigelow, which is why I'm interested in this work. Why I'm interested in Dr. Mishlove, why I'm interested in Esbjørn Hargen's work with integrating all of these things. I get crunked out, or I get really angry about some things. Sometimes I focus on the false memory stuff. I go, oh, this is really bad. I'm horrified by it. But actually, they're making earnest mistakes in a context where it's really justifiable to do really great work. And this work, I go, wow, actually, SETI by entanglement, this is associated with Kona blue in my mind. I've talked to Michael Ibsen about the context of this paper. I haven't really gotten him quoting. I haven't quoted him on any of these things. I go, this is my suspicion, and I have literary reasons why, and I'll talk about that for a variety of reasons. But I think this SETI by entanglement was to support one aspect of the Kona blue proposal. As you note, we've got Hal Puthoff, associated with the Institute of Advanced Studies, and Kit Green, who was associated with the Bix judgment. They both added contributions to this paper, so that's another kind of direct connection. There's also really good reasons why I suspect that. So we need to talk a little bit about Kona blue, because that was the follow-up to the Bigelow Aerospace's OSAP study with the U.S. government. So the U.S. government studied UFOs with OSAP, with Bigelow, with BASS, they call it, Bigelow Aerospace or whatever. That was written about in 2017 by Leslie Kean, right? And then something happened with BASS, and they wanted to do something else, and they proposed this Kona blue and didn't come forward, right? I love this paper too, because it says you can authenticate dream telepathy with aliens through geometry and math that the receiver doesn't understand. I've documented that. I have video documentation of that experience. The universal language is that. The book Galahad the Great's Field Guide to Anomalous Geometry is that authentication. That I'm being very serious about that. These are my claims. I'm saying that Galahad the tall gray extraterrestrial gave me dream telepathy and authenticated it in a method that was predicted by these people associated with the Kona Blue proposal. They say, how will we tell if we actually got an ET message? It's through geometry. I don't understand the geometry I got so well. And that means we're at one level of proof, right? Do other people understand it? I don't know. But actually, does it mean anything? I don't know. But I'm hitting the mark. I fell within a spectrum of the authentication test. I'm not the worst and I'm not the best in terms of what happened. And that happened before I found this paper. So wow, right? This is why I'm very concerned about all of the things Bigelow is doing, is because my telepathic dream experiences with tall gray extraterrestrials told me to pay attention to it. All right, so we need to dig into what Kona Blue actually proposed. This is extremely similar to Skinwalkers at the Pentagon's appendix about research like this that's really congratulated both Bigelow and Hans Adam for funding research like this. So there's these little hints throughout all of the documentation that really give a clue as to what the social standing or situation is. We need to look at, so these two slides talk about the different centers of what was proposed to be Kona Blue. Those centers include National Institute for Discovery Center, that comes out of NDEs, obviously, data collection, experiments, medical division, data analysis division, right? Then Advanced Technology Center, right? And then Consciousness Center. This is what where that study by entanglement would support. And that's through collection of critical data utilizing remote sensing, that's remote viewing, in order to determine the activity and purpose of the advanced technology, especially any threat posed. And then in an expanded role, remote sensing and related techniques may present an invaluable aid in countering illicit activities conducted against the U.S. Demonstrations of capability will be made. So, so next up, as part of what Galahad the Grey had me do, my dream contact, he had me write this book. This is the DRIP, Dream D-SETI Research Institute Proposal, DRIP. So D-SETI Research Institute Proposal. And they had me dedicate it to Hans Adam II, Prince of Liechtenstein, and Robert Bigelow for funding, for supporting the 1990s research that defined the UFO abduction syndrome. May your legacy empower humanity to engage the non-human world with dignity for the benefit of all. So that was the dedication of my work. I'm doing that because his work was so important. So I'm talking about Bigelow, and we'll talk about the connection of Mishlove and my work and stuff like that. So another thing I know is Bigelow is a wholly owned subsidiary. The Bigelow Institute of Consciousness is part of the R.T. Bigelow Educational Foundation, huge source of funding going forward in the future. We talked a lot about what that might mean. And so I'm just putting out all these pieces on the pieces of the puzzle on the table because I'm trying to figure it out. Because I actually believe that there is an element necessary, some action I need to do in the world related to this, because my dreams tell me to do so. And I'm trying to figure out many different aspects of this work. In part, that is figuring out why Bigelow is doing this. And that, in part, is figuring out the conversation between Mishlove and Bigelow and Danny Jones, etc. So remember Dr. Mishlove, we're talking about him. He's the co-director of parapsychology education at the California Institute for Human Sciences. That's where I am a PhD student, currently on leave of absence, hoping to resolve that by summer. I need some help. I need some funding. I can't keep going. This is why it's important to me, because there's funding on the table. I've sent my books to Bigelow. I've told everyone I need money, and nothing happens, right? And I do session work with people, and they donate really well. But that is not, that is few and far between, and not enough for me to actually support a career in academics. Just not going to happen. My family is too sick of me actually doing this work, supporting it without pay or support. And actually, I side with them. I'd rather have a nice family life than understand the mysteries of the UFO, because I actually understand what is going on with my dreams, and that is not necessarily what media says. And so I want to help out this conversation, but I need some help. How? And so I've been paying attention to Robert Bigelow as a potential funding source, and I go, wow, Jeffrey Mishlove, who has $500,000 from Bigelow, is coming into the California Institute for Human Sciences, setting up a department. Wow, look at this. The integral Doctor of Philosophy, Integral Noetic Sciences, within the last year, started a new concentration, the UAP in Consciousness Studies concentration, right? And that is interesting to me because that's actually moving into the language that Bigelow uses. So I see two movements here. I need to know what's going on. That's the thing. I go, there's something happening here. I need to know what it is, and I'm a little bit concerned about it because if it's not done well, we will reiterate some of the issues with the 1990s research that has caused significant emotional distress in my life, and is the source of why I get so angry about false memories, is because there's a possibility of accidentally creating harmful false memories in somewhere like 2 to 5% of the population about these things, where they believe all sorts of fantastic things, and they make it real through their dreams, through their powerful dreams, through their psionic summoning of NHI or whatever. They summon specific types in response to the priming of the authoritative research put forward by these people in certain ways. And so I get really concerned about harmful false memories, and I've shared this discussion with people, and I go, I actually have to be in integrity with myself, even if Bigelow's moving into my PhD program situation. I don't know that for a fact, but I know I'm concerned about harmful false memories, and I know we need to talk about it, and I know that the IRB of the institute that is leading the academic discussion needs to be aware of harmful false memories. They need to do that. They need to know that many of these experiences about UAPs and NHI are interpreted through lenses derived from the 1990s interpretation of dreams, sleep paralysis dreams. I'm talking about this in terms of the UFO abduction syndrome. This is an advanced argument, but it's actually simple and based in literature. And I'm raising these concerns, and I've raised these concerns. And I raised these concerns to the school, the California Institute for Human Sciences. I go, hey, we're doing research. It needs advanced ethics oversight. I need to see that. I need to prove that we can actually achieve that. And I've actually come to an official dialogue with this institute, and I'm so grateful for that. Dr. Mishlove really helped me kind of understand that there are people who have engaged with this, and there are methods of engaging with this through parapsychology. The example of parapsychology is great in terms of addressing these things, because parapsychology deals with vulnerable populations, and so does this experience. So I wanted to read a section of this. I submitted this to the school in part because I wanted an official answer from the school, knowing that they're posturing to receive money from Robert Bigelow. I go, I'm making that deduction. Jeffrey Mishlove is showing up. There's a new concentration that is aimed at consciousness studies. I know that the Wild Cosmos paper has a kind of epitaph by Colm Keller about this work. So I know what's going on. So I know there's posturing to receive this money from Bigelow, because Bigelow's one of the only sources of money in this in this field. And so I'm actually concerned. I go, which way will the school go? Are we actually going to hold sort of intellectual freedom and integrity in ethical oversights over these things? Or are we going to sweep some things under the rug, not talk about them in order to get some money, sort of thing? And I think that's inappropriate, but I think that's a really human response. Like, oh, this is like, don't don't bite the hand that feeds you, right? Someone's got to say, hey, Robert Bigelow, the thing you experienced when you were a kid looks a lot like sleep paralysis, right? The stuff that you explored with Johnny Mac looks a lot like confabulation, right? The stuff we're talking about veers along those lines, that razor edge between truth and fantasy. So someone's got to say that. Who's going to say that? I don't know. Pretty sure it's not CIHS. I asked them to. And this is where I asked them to. I officially asked them to offer commentary about these things. And so in this section of the grievance definition, I wrote, in this section, it's part of 6 questions I posed to the grievance committee that was actually addressed only by the Dr. Stacy Gomes, the provost, which I think is an appropriate response, because I actually don't think I have a grievance, according to them, about my issues. It's more of a quandary, let's say, or a paradox, or I'm not sure. So in this section, I asked the question, are Arrow claims about fanatic believers in UAP disclosure valid? Why or why not? So the context of this is, I had a very powerful lucid dream where a green alien in the street came and gave me a message. And the message was, the green alien in the street will give you a message. The green man in the street. It's Green Street. And then like the next hour, I saw Green Street talking about Arrow and the Arrow report. And in this, Sean Kirkpatrick says, hey, we know there's like all these claims about crash retrievals. Actually, those come from a small group of people, and they're circular reporting, and they're not accepting scientific evidence, right? One person goes, oh, no, like Admiral Gallaudet says this, and Admiral Gallaudet says, no, the Israeli prime minister says something about the Galactic Federation, and then they, oh no, and then that goes back this way. So there's circular reporting, and no one's actually receiving the objective evidence that, no, there's not a lot of physical nuts and bolts stuff. That's at least what Arrow says, but that's the official response from the U.S. government through the All-Domain, All Anomaly Resolution Office. So this is actually what the U.S. government says. And in that context, Kirkpatrick does not want to name the individuals. The individuals clearly center around Robert Bigelow based on the literature. It's obvious. So I'm going to read my questions to CIHS. Arrow is the official government office set up to resolve claims regarding UAP disclosure. Their 2024 report suggests that recent UAP disclosure claims derive from a small group of people with fanatic belief in UAP and UAPs as extraterrestrial technology. Arrow, now this is a quote, Arrow assesses that the inaccurate claim that the U.S. government is reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology and is hiding it from Congress is, in large part, the result of circular reporting from a group of individuals who believe this to be the case despite lack of any evidence. Now I'm asking the questions. Back to my writing. While the Arrow director, Dr. Kirkpatrick, has been hesitant to name the group of individuals, it is clear that the group centers around Robert Bigelow because he was the government contractor who was reported on by the famous 2017 New York Times article that established mainstream credibility of UAP disclosure narratives. In the video presentation of an interview with Kirkpatrick, reporter Greenstreet named several members of the group, which included 3 Weiser advisors. So Weiser is the super experiencer study put forward by Dr. Esbjørn Hargens at CIHS that is advised by Chris Bledsoe, Kean, and was advised by Kaleher. Kaleher, who no longer appears as an advisor, Kean, and Nolan. If the official position of the U.S. government about UAP disclosure is valid, then I must pose the question, Is the wiser study advised by UAP fanatics who selectively reject scientific evidence in favor of extraterrestrial technology? Consequently, I request that CIHS, CANS, or INS leadership make statements disambiguating the wiser advisory board from the UAP fanatics implied by Kirkpatrick and named by Greenstreet, such as Kean and Nolan. Additionally, I would request the courtesy of a statement disambiguating CIHS associated studies and research from Bigelow's activity or influence in UAP studies and experience or research for several reasons. First, Bigelow is central to UAP disclosure narratives and is a primary funder of consciousness studies, as implied by the ERA report. Consequently, the concentration name UAP and consciousness studies implies a theoretic tie to Bigelow or Bigelow-influenced UAP disclosure narratives. The fact that Kaleher was listed as an early advisor is literary proof of the connection. Second, the Wiser study is proposed to be the third major ETNHI experiencer study in the literature, which began with a Bigelow-funded unusual events survey that was published in the 1992 Unusual Personal Experiences booklet and mailed to 100,000 mental health workers by the Bigelow Holding Corporation. Based on my research, client work, and personal experiences, this booklet and its promotion is the cause for significant induction of possibly harmful false memories of alien abduction. Consequently, I request clarity as to how Wiser or the CIHS IRB committees will mitigate the risk of harmful false memories given the influence of Bigelow and the Unusual Events Survey on UAP studies and experiencer research. So, they did not respond to this question. They didn't respond to any of my questions. They said, no, the role of an institute, especially this institute, is to mediate student concerns, is what they said. And therefore, this discussion of advanced kind of complex issues is not appropriate for the institute. I actually feel like the institute has an ethical and legal obligation to oversee research and to understand it. And given the fact that this research is so controversial, that there is some level of extraordinary needs here. The institute responded, hey, you can work with Dr. Sean through the Center for Anomalous and Noetic Studies in a collaboration to explore these issues. That's the great place to do it. They go, oh, okay, actually, they're responding to me like an institute through bureaucratic schedules and stuff like that, giving me a bureaucratic way to actually accomplish what I need to do. And so that's their response to me. I have yet to write the proposals I need to move that forward. I was given the response maybe a week ago. I'm in the process of moving. I'm doing a lot of stuff. This kind of activity, the sun activity, the kind of live streaming is easier for me to work into my schedule than doing those things. But those proposals are coming soon. We'll have the methods and ethics for experiencer research. That's the project name I'm going to propose as MIRROR, MEER, MIRROR, Methods and Ethics for Experiencer Research. And we'll explore these topics through that kind of collaboration. So now it's time to actually get into what Mishlove had to say about Bigelow on the Danny Jones podcast. And so I'm offering this. I'm looking at this now because I have set up this really big context. This is why I care so much about what Mishlove has to say here. And so now I hope you care a little bit more, having understood this context and why this is so much more important than what is being demonstrated through Skywatcher narratives or whatever. It's been done through Skywatcher. I don't care necessarily about it so much because actually the shape and size of the UAP disclosure field is held within the hands of Bigelow and Hans Adam and several other major players who are several tiers above whatever Skywatcher is doing in terms of what is happening in the UAP disclosure community. That circularly reporting group of individuals behaves like an like a cohort. It behaves in part like a cult around Johnny Mac's credentials, around these ideas, around certain personalities, and that's totally fine. That's how it should be. I'm totally not creeped out by the fact it's cultish, because all of these things are cultish. Like, remember what I talked about with Trungpa Rinpoche and Shambhala and the lapel pin that Mishlove is holding and going, this feels a little cultish, and that's totally fine, because all of this information proceeds through these psionic ways, right? These subjective interpersonal ways. There's this long stream of tradition all the way back to Socrates that talks about idealist ideas, right, and entity connections through these sort of cultish ways, right? You would interact with the philosopher, with the theurgist, right? You would interact with someone. They would interpret your experiences for you, and that happens in cultish ways. And we had an old definition of cult for a while, and now cult implies harm, and so I need to disambiguate that. But so let's get into it. Let's hear what he has to say. I'm going to offer this under the fair use for educational purposes. I'll play this and pause it and offer my commentary. This comes from Danny Jones. So let's listen. There's about 5-10 minutes we're going to go through.
Did some sort of competition or something with that billionaire dude?
Oh yeah, the Bigelow essay.
Bigelow, yeah. What was that about?
It was to write a 25,000-word essay on the best evidence for survival of human consciousness after permanent bodily death.
Why did he want to do that?
Well, shortly before he announced the contest, his wife died.
Oh.
And he also had a son and I think a grandson who had died from suicide.
Oh.
So I'm just going to pause it right here, right? We've been talking about Robert Bigelow's motivations to fund life after death research, right? Why he's doing this work. There's, his UFO work, but also this consciousness studies work, this survival of life after death. Why is he doing it? Well, his wife died. He had a son and grandson commit suicide. This is what Mishlove is telling us in this moment. These are axioms. These are premises. These influence and bias, whatever comes out of it. It's really important to understand that there is a motivation here. I am similarly motivated in my research about ET contact. And the reason why I feel it's okay to talk about this is because we're talking about serious things that have serious implications. Robert Bigelow's work with Johnny Mac in the 1990s influenced my life, and I believe traumatized me for decades about my shamanic dreaming experiences. That is akin to the psychological suffering, right? This is on the, not on the, it's like death of a loved one is huge, but spending 2 to 3 decades in psychological trauma around this is actually huge too. And people actually seem to take their lives or others' lives. There's like so many things that this vulnerable population associated with alien abduction and NHI and UAP contact narratives does or could do, right? We're now talking about motivations that are deathly serious, right? And working with mediums, that's one of the reasons why skeptics get so angry about mediums, is because it seems like they're preying on people's grief. I believe in mediumship. I believe in psychic mediumship. I believe the spirit of my father shows up sometimes. I believe that I can enter an expanded state of consciousness, receive impressions through my imagination and imaginal faculties that have associative meaning to the person I share them with. I believe that. Whether or not I'm actually communicating with a spirit, I don't know. I know it appears that way. And I know that I can make it appear other ways. But I also know that regardless of that, how it appears, right, the interaction I can have with someone about this is perhaps meaningful, transformative, and insightful. And so we're dealing with really strong motivations about death here. This is what Mishlove is saying motivated Bigelow to do his consciousness studies. So let's keep going.
Oh no.
Yeah, so he had developed, and I think, to be fair, he had an interest in the afterlife going back a long time. He had sort of pushed it off to the side, but at that point in time, his wife had died, his grandson and son had taken their lives, and his aerospace business had become basically, how to put it, the governor of the state of Nevada during the pandemic had declared his aerospace business to be a non-essential business, so that the employees he could have kept them on the payroll, I suppose, but they couldn't come into the factory. So he let all the employees go. They were swept up by other companies, and in effect, he no longer had a business.
Oh no.
So
he decided to do this. That's wild.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very creative solution.
Oh, it's super creative. I mean, people that are willing to spend that much money to do something like this, where there's no monetary return, like there's no profit to be found, just out of pure creativity and curiosity.
Right.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And what was how did it work? So how did he pick people to do this? And what was the prize?
Had to fill out an application in order to be qualified to write the essay. He wanted serious people who really understood the field.
Okay.
And as I recall, there were maybe 1,200 people who filled out application forms. Some 200 of them were accepted to write essays.
Okay. And how did you get picked? You wrote out. You filled out an application. And...
I filled out. Well, here's the interesting thing. I first heard about the competition from Leslie Kean.
Oh yeah.
She
works for the New York Times, right?
Yeah. Well, she was a stringer for the New York Times. She'd written articles about UFOs. She had written a book about survival, and she said to me.
So Leslie Kean, remember that name. Leslie Kean was the reporter that wrote the 2017 New York Times article about UAP disclosure in Bigelow, right? So that's with Helene Cooper and Ralph Blumenthal. This is the reason why CHS is actually allowed to do stuff about UAPs. That brought the zeitgeist forward to say it's credible. She also did stuff with mediumship and things like that. She is the former partner of Bud Hopkins. Now that's absolutely challenging to talk about because it sort of feels like an ad hominem attack. But when we're dealing with a circularly reporting group of individuals that sort of feels like a cult, we have to actually track those human relationships. Bud Hopkins was an alien abduction researcher. He trained David Jacobs and Johnny Mack. And I'll talk a little bit about that coming up. If you've watched Sun before, you know we have a segment called The Priest of High Strangeness. And that's what we're going to talk about in the context. Bud Hopkins is huge there. And so that's the kind of context. So in 1992, Bigelow was funding work by Hopkins to define the UFO abduction syndrome. So this is a long-standing relationship. Whatever came out of this came out through a long-standing relationship. And so Mishlove is talking about the sort of connection he has with that long-standing cohort that is actively defining the UAP disclosure narrative.
Survival.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
She has a book called, I think it's titled Surviving Death.
Oh, wow.
Or something of that sort. So she was known. In fact, now that I think about it, I heard about the essay and I reached out to her. I said, Leslie, you should enter. You just published a book on the topic. And she got back to me and said, no, I'm one of the judges. And then she said, you got to listen to this podcast with George Knapp because Bigelow was asked, who should enter the competition? And he said, people like Jeffrey Mishlove should enter.
Who said George Knapp said this?
No, Bigelow.
Oh, Bigelow said this. Okay.
Yeah, Robert,
oh, wow.
Robert Bigelow said people who have been.
By the way, Bigelow has that podcast with George Knapp, and I believe that's where he discussed his conferences, the unusual events survey or the unusual personal experiences booklet kind of conferences. So they publish that booklet and they go out through the conferences. And so I actually doubted those claims that he made that he engaged 100,000 mental health workers through conferences. I doubted that Bigelow did that. But in that podcast with or maybe that podcast, maybe a different podcast with Knapp, he says, no, actually, they went nationwide conferences, and he describes actually what happens. And so that's another point. That podcast, a podcast with Bigelow and Knapp is actually kind of grounds me to say, hey, actually, there was a significant engagement of the mental health community through this UFO abduction syndrome lens by the Bigelow Holding Corporation.
Studying.
Oh, so he was a fan of yours.
This material all their lives.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
All right. So walk me through.
Well, I told.
Okay, so there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to go forward to Mishlove's understanding of the near-death experience, and then we're going to talk a bit more about things. So let's skip forward to. Oh, oops.
Did some sort of competition or something with that billionaire dude? Those are the two biggest questions, that we have: is what happens after we die, and are we alone? And you're right on the leading edge of all this stuff.
And where did we come from?
Yeah. Right. So what do you think happened? What do you think is going on here when people are having these near-death experiences, and where are we going?
I think that the near-death experience represents the early stages of the afterlife.
The early stages of the afterlife. Okay.
Yeah. I don't think, after all, the people have recently died or nearly died.
Right.
And so this is like, I think the afterlife could be viewed as a progression. I think there are probably almost infinitely many possibilities over time, but initially you got to get oriented.
Yeah. I like this.
But what do you think happens after that stage? Where do you think we go?
Well, I think the one obvious possibility is reincarnation. There's good evidence that people do or can, let me put it this way, people can reincarnate.
Yeah.
Not that they have to. And
I like this so much. I like the perspective here. This perspective is very similar to what's put forward by Dr. Sean Esbjørn Hargens in the Our Wild Cosmos paper. That's a theoretic foundation for the work we're doing at the Institute. But I like this because Mishlove's understanding is evidence-based. It is evidence-based, so he's looking at evidence. It's similar to what Esbjørn Hargens did in the kind of literary comparison of the evidence. So we're now looking at evidence for what people are saying about these experiences, and there's this sort of flexibility about the near-death experience that is very similar to the ET/NHI contact experience, which is in part has been explored through the contact modality work with Ray Hernandez and things like that. So let's keep going.
Not that everybody does, but it's an option. Another option would be to move into other dimensions of, you could call it the supersensible realm, other hyperspace dimensions or dimensions, non-physical dimensions. Another option might be to reincarnate, but not on Earth, on other planets.
Oh my God. Hang on. I like that option to reincarnate on other planets. That's the starseed.
Did some sort of
we're going to go forward now to
with that billionaire dude.
Oh yeah, the Bigelow.
Those are the two biggest questions, that we have: is what happens after we die, and to that stage, where do you think we go?
Well, I think the one obvious possibility is reincarnation. There's
okay, here we go. Next
Bigelow.
steps.
Yeah.
After he wrote you the check, what did you have any conversations with him about this, and And is he trying to explore this further or push the
This
boundaries
is
of
Bigelow's
this?
next
Well,
step.
he set up an institute called the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies to explore life after death. He invited me to join the board of directors, and but subsequently, I think, he's an entrepreneur. I think he's moving in other directions. He's creating a new foundation that is taking over that institute. So I don't know what's happening. I think I'll have to get back in touch with him. He's been very actively involved in politics this year.
Oh, has he really?
Yes.
Interesting.
So watch this. This is one reason why I really appreciate Mishlove's perspective, and I am integrating comments people have made. It's like, don't be so negative. Tell us what you like about this. So these people before, making the assumption that the fact I'm bringing a skeptical perspective that is sort of challenging forward means I disrespect them. That's not the case. I really do respect everyone I've named on this, the Sun, and even before. But so one of the things that really clued me into Mishlove is I was listening to a New Thinking Aloud communication. I don't know who was interviewing, can't remember, but the person was talking about how Bill Gates was funding vaccines and how there might be some sort of evil conspiracy. And Mishlove just said, it's really... He kind of had a very kind response. It was basically like, if you're so triggered about single individual billionaires with this conspiracy narrative, think about yourself first. Like, turn back and see where you're personally responsible for that trigger, for that issue. So I heard that and I was like, oh, I'm actually really triggered about Bigelow, about a billionaire like this guy was about Gates. And so I started doing, practices that were inspired to understand the humanity of the people. They're not some nefarious kind of source of evil. They're human beings, and that's in part why I've gone on this exploration. Is because Mishlove talked to someone on his podcast about Bill Gates, and I go, oh, I need to do the same thing he's talking about with Gates and this conspiracy theorist as I am with Bigelow or whatever. And so that's really helpful for me. So listen how Mishlove discusses challenging political issues. You can feel some vibration here, and I think it's telling about what sort of person and research Mishlove does, which I respect and appreciate in this context.
Yeah, he was in fact one of the early.
He's in Nevada, right?
He's in Nevada. Yes.
Okay. What were you saying? He's doing what?
He became a DeSantis supporter.
Oh, really?
Yes, he gave millions of dollars to DeSantis, and then he got
really. That's interesting.
He got fed up.
Why DeSantis, you think?
Well, I did have many conversations with him about it. I think he felt that after the January 6th insurrection, that Trump was not a viable candidate.
Oh, and he wanted DeSantis to be president.
Yeah, and then after DeSantis signed the bill to make abortion illegal in Florida after 6 weeks, he felt that was too extreme, and he switched his allegiance to Trump.
He did.
Yeah.
Interesting guy, man.
Mm-hmm.
To have that much money and to be willing just to throw it out at all these crazy ideas and crazy, just like dump millions of dollars just into curiosity that's not gonna pay you back. Like all the people with the most money in the world, just seems like they do the things that's gonna make them more money.
Well, I give him a lot of credit. I think that nobody has done more to bring the field of survival research into public prominence.
Right.
Same thing with alien abduction.
I heard something a while ago. I don't know if it's true, but I heard that with all there's some sort of rule in the FAA where if pilots or commercial pilots or anything see any kind of UFO or unidentified object in their airspace, they have to report it to his private aerospace company, but not the FAA. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, sort of. He set up what was called the BAAS, the Bigelow Aerospace
Yeah.
Advanced and something. And then he was close friends with Harry Reid, who at the time was the head of the U.S. Senate, and he arranged with Harry Reid to begin researching the potential threat to national security that might be imposed by UFOs. For example, if nothing else, aviation accidents.
Right, of course.
And they set up a program that was funded called OSAP.
Yep.
Okay, I'm not going into this. This is good history, but there's more there. The reporting to Bigelow is absolutely interesting. There's a slide more about that. I heard a rumor about him receiving the MUFON database, presenting that to the government, and the government going, "Are you giving us spying on our citizen? We can't actually have this, therefore we can't continue." And that was the rumor I heard. So I wanted to just put that out there in terms of revealing what sort of, what sort of activities are actually happening here with Bigelow around these things. I want to move forward to a really quick discussion about Bledsoe, right? So this is, Bledsoe is a character that I'm paying attention to, Chris Bledsoe, because I have tracked his claims regarding the 2022 Monroe Institute sighting that he wrote about in the final sighting of his book, UFO of God. That's my friend Dan Berg participated in that, Esbjørn Hargens, and a number of other people. I know that is a satellite, and as identified by a Canadian government scientist, satellite likely 29E, Intelsat 29E. I just want to share that because we're kind of exploring these things with the Danny Jones podcast and all of these claims. So I will pull that up. We're on 5230 here. So 5230.
Right.
So I wonder, like, how many people right now, like Grush included, are being Paul Benowitzed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't know.
And like a great example of this is this gentleman I had on the show. His name's Chris Bledsoe. He's from North Carolina.
Yeah.
And
so Paul Benowitz, this is a guy who, Mirage Men is the documentary. He was the target of a psychological manipulation regarding UFOs to hide the fact that he had footage of secret airplanes, and he eventually, I think, killed himself or something very tragic there.
And he sees these orbs, these light orbs that fly around.
I know, Chris.
Yeah. And he took me and Steve out to the beach the night before we did the show with him and his family. And he started saying these prayers on the beach, like praying for these things to show themselves. He believes that they're angelic beings. And after like an hour and a half, there were these weird lights that came up off the ocean, would move around in weird ways. They definitely weren't airplanes because we saw airplanes that were coming in, the air traffic that was coming in to land in Tampa.
Yeah.
There was a very specific flight path. There was a couple specific flight paths that we could see a pattern with the airplanes. There were flashing lights. These were not those.
Yeah.
We got it on video. Steve, you have the video?
Ever since I changed computers, I don't.
We don't.
I had to re-find it.
It's on Dropbox. But anyways, so like that was wild.
Well,
but at the same time, I've never seen anything like that before. But at the same time, I've never stared at the sky for 2 hours straight.
Yeah.
You know, so is this stuff always there?
Well, it reminds me of Ted Owens saying, there's going to be a UFO that will be photographed and shown on the front page.
Yes, that reminded me of that.
There's a whole category of people who practice the art, and Ted Owens trained people to do this, of summoning lights in the sky.
Right.
And it's not so different from bending spoons.
Right. I guess not. And the other thing about him is that there was more people. He was visited by so many people in the military and within NASA and within other spooky
CIA,
agencies, CIA, one guy from the NRO, some really shadowy guy in the NRO that was coming to like his kids' football games and stuff like that, and like befriending them and trying to figure out, inviting him to the launches at NASA and Cape Canaveral. Your friend John Alexander became good friends with him.
Yep.
And like reinforced his belief that these are angelic beings, these are angels. We want to know how they, we want to figure out how you're seeing these things. And like they've cemented his belief of this stuff. And at the same time,
that's what I'm talking about in terms of harmful false memories. And one of the reasons why I'm concerned about authoritative research and the use of accredited credentials like PhD or that sort of thing to support these narratives, because even the conversations, like I have, when I work with people, I know that I can cement belief patterns one way or the other. And I generally cement the patterns that every individual is capable of resolving their issues related to this, that they are powerful dreamers like everyone, and that they can use these experiences for their own benefit and the benefit of their communities. That's what I'm trying to cement, that we should use the ethics and epistemology of dream work, that sort of thing. But Chris Bledsoe's experience in Danny Jones' assessment is because his belief has been cemented that these things are angels and orbs because of the repeated visitation of government people to Chris Bledsoe. And now this is really interesting in terms of the reporting conversation. So we have an example as to what Bigelow does with the life after death that just sort of happened, right? So he just sort of he had two relatives commit suicide, and a wife recently passed, and decided to run this sort of challenge and the essay contest in the last 4 years, and really got 65 mediums systematically answering a question, and got 204 people writing about life after death. Oh my God, right? Like he did so much in 4 years around that. And so now I know for a fact that Bigelow ran the survey, the unusual events survey, 3 times. That's about 18,000 people, maybe 10 to 20,000 people, let's say, answering these questions. I know the first time he didn't ask a question, but the last time he did ask a question: can we contact you? Can we contact you? So he's surveyed the population. He has an understanding of these symptoms of UFO contact, and he has permission and contact information of the respondents to these things. And so he's doing something with it. What is he doing? Well, we're going to veer into a realm of rumors in this moment, and then I'll continue the presentation. The rumor that I understand is that OSAP stopped being funded, not for many reasons, but the nail in the coffin was the fact that he brought in the MUFON database into the BAS database, and then presented that database of UFO sightings to his government employers. That then created a weird situation where it looked like the government employers were spying on UFO contactees through MUFON. And that is a rumor. I don't know. If anyone has information, let me know. I saw it once. I thought I'd remember where I'd see it, but I don't. So that is fascinating to me. But I know, right, that there is lore around Bledsoe, right? Like he reported to MUFON in around the same time that this might be active, right? Certain kind of his experience, right? And we know that perhaps, right, if they cued off some of the symptoms, right? And so there may have been a full circle thing happening here. I don't know. But I think in part that all of the pieces and players are around the table now that kind of give us an understanding, right? There's the BAS situation, the OSAP thing with Bigelow, the government sucking up data, perhaps from MUFON, we don't know. Bledsoe throwing his data in MUFON. I don't know. Bledsoe's kind of next to Fort Bragg. We don't know what's happening there, but there's a report, then government's responding to Bledsoe, right? So this might be a full circle event that we could be actually seeing emerge in real time. That's in part why I'm tracking what people say publicly about these things. That's why we're taking the hour or two to explore these perhaps 10, 20 minutes of conversation on Danny Jones. But let's keep going.
These are people who are trained liars for the U.S. government. Not all of them. But like the CIA, that's typically what the CIA is supposed to do. Like, you know, in when Area 51 was started, when the CIA pilots started testing the first jet planes, they had to bring gorilla masks in the cockpit with them in case they came in visual distance of a passenger airplane. If they saw a jet airplane flying, they would put the gorilla mask on. So if they were to go to the bar and say, hey, I saw this fucking crazy jet propelled airplane today and it was a gorilla flying it, right? It's strategic deception. We've been playing these games forever.
That's a possibility. On the other hand, as I know, Chris Bledsoe is also close with Diane Pasulka, who is a religious scholar.
Yep, and they work together.
And who has pointed out that the biblical descriptions of angels actually are much closer to the phenomenon that he's reporting than to the sort of Hallmark card depiction of little cherubs with wings.
Okay, so that's the end of what I wanted to talk about. There's a sort of rebuttal I have to that is, if we're dealing with constructed narratives, confabulation, or delusions, right, you can draw your thematic sources, and any religious scholar, especially one who has engaged with people like Gary Nolan and Travis Taylor, right? Like those people, it's all fishy, right? It's all a little fishy, but we have actual studies from behavioral scientists and social scientists and psychologists about false memory and delusion. I have reports from, government scientists that Bledsoe actually saw a rotating satellite and not what he claims. And so there's a discussion that we need to have. That said, I don't think the discussion that I want to have around false memories and delusions needs to stand in the way or stand over or eclipse this discussion of what actually is happening. I look to Bledsoe as a great example of an experiencer in some way, shape, and form that has a lot of asterisks to my support of that because of the confusing narrative. I actually believe that his depiction of his orb event, and he directed the Discovery Channel to recreate his orb sighting, and he did so with very specific geometry that I think means there's some sort of imprinting of this geometric communication that I'm seeking, right? That I talked about with Galathog and Study by Entanglement, that this actual geometry is encoded in his consciousness because of the orbs he saw. That's the hypothesis I still hold, even though I'm concerned about delusions, lies, manipulations. And so I would stand and say, yeah, actually there is some level of experience here, but I have to ask questions about delusion, confabulation, and psyops in addition to what did you experience? Tell me your naive story, and I'm not going to question it. So I think we need to integrate some of those perspectives, which is why I'm talking about this, but it should not mean disrespect to anyone in this conversation. So we will just continue our presentation here, our segments of Sun, Skeptics UAP News. There's nothing new under the sun. We're inspired by this man, Philip Klass, and his work with the Skeptics UFO newsletter. I don't know if Philip Klass brought forward a lot of class with his skepticism and was not necessarily as credulous as I am. But I look to his work, and in this live stream series, we are just looking at it together. We're just speaking about it. We're just looking into it to understand there is really nothing new under the sun. So this newsletter, number 5, because we're in the 5th episode of my series, comes from September 1990, and it talks about Ed Walter changes his UFO tale again. So last time we discovered Ed Walters has the Gulf Breeze UFO sighting. He has photos. There was a discovery of a model. There's just so much drama around this. It was a thing I looked at as a kid, so there's just pages about this model, about who says what, right? Who says what. I don't really care to look into it except to show, hey, this thing is happening. This was part of my experience. We've got a book review by Philip Klass here in the newsletter. It's reproduced from Los Angeles Times. It's about the government's secret quest for extraterrestrials, and it's pretty much the same. I haven't read all of this. It sort of feels like what we're talking about with whistleblowers. They're not talking about psionics, but they're talking about other things. So, there's not much else I wanted to point out about this one. It's mostly just drama around these things, and so I don't want to get into it. But I wanted to we're just bringing these things alive. We're just metabolizing some of the past skepticism by looking into it. Sun is a liturgy delivered by me, Daniel Rekshin, as a priest of high strangeness. I'm disclosing the secret church of high strangeness here. So that's important. I mentioned this before. And what is a priest of high strangeness? Well, this term comes from Carol Rainey. She wrote about John Mack, Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs in their work that define the UFO abduction syndrome using hypnosis as a means of knowledge. So I say hypnosis is a sacrament of the priests of high strangeness. Right? It's a domain of revelation. It's a ritual, a ceremony of revelation, divine revelation, right? Is hypnosis. And so basically here, Rainey says, these guys who are using academic credentials, they're relating to the credentials of John Mack, they're doing all of this stuff, but they don't have any ethical oversight. They're IRBs. There's no IRB looking into them. What level of oversight seems manipulated and biased? And so this is the motivation, one of the motivations I have for communicating in strange, triggering, and challenging ways with the California Institute for Human Sciences, because we actually need an ethical body to oversee research and claims made by authoritative researchers, so we don't cement these weird beliefs and then circularly reinform ourselves by them. So that's what's going on here. Let's go through it. We honor the apostolic succession, let's say, of the Church of High Strangeness. This is Bud Hopkins, former partner of Leslie Kean, who was so important to Bigelow. So this tradition being passed from partner to partner, Hopkins to Kean, right? He even showed up through a psychic medium session, seance, to Kean and said, "Hey, I'm Bud Hopkins. I'm here from beyond the grave." And that felt really important in her writing, and is important to acknowledge where we're at. Here's David Jacobs in his book, A Secret Life. They were funded by Robert Bigelow to define the UFO abduction syndrome, along with a sociologist named Ron Westrom, who later informed MUFON. We've got Johnny Mack. He's the bishop of high strangeness, let's say, because his credentials were literally borrowed by Robert Bigelow to introduce the UFO abduction syndrome to the mental health community. That is an event that has historic significance and one of the reasons, material causes of why I'm doing this work today. And we've got Robert Bigelow, who we've been talking about, and his publication, Unusual Personal Experiences as a Sacred Text of the Church of High Strangeness. So I heard a rumor. I talked about that. This slide should have been earlier in the presentation, but it's around Bigelow and OSAP and MUFON. And if anyone knows where this rumor comes from, I'd love to find that. So I'm a priest of high strangeness. This is my sacred text, Missing Time Found. It's also Galahad the Gray's Field Guide to Anomalous Geometry is another sacred text in this series, let's say. So Sun is a practice of Enochian magic. I'm using Enochian magic as a priest of high strangeness to transmute the disempowerments of alien abduction into the empowerments of shamanic dreaming. That's what I'm doing here. That's what I told Bigelow I was doing when I asked him for what's the equivalent of $250,000 from 1992, which is what he spent to fund the abduction research. I said, let's actually do it again, but under the hypothesis that it is both dream and real event. What is Enochian magic? Well, it comes from Dr. John Dee. He's the precedent for psionics and intelligence community associations with angels and non-human intelligences. Nothing new under the sun. And I've read all about John Dee. And so I use that as a historical example to understand what's actually happening here with characters like Hal Puthoff and the remote sensing and things like that. This is an example of the text I read in the beginning, that strange language I sang, that and this was channeled through Edward Kelly by Dr. John Dee in the 16th century for angelic communication. And I use this language because it is like ecclesiastical Latin of that sort of situation, but it also has power to invoke connections with the Enochian angels. And beware the dangers of Enochian magic. You can look up my video on that, about what the dangers are. So something yet remains. Something yet remains. This segment is when we honor Thomas Bullard. Who is Thomas Bullard? Well, he received $500 from the Fund of UFO Research to write the book, something like Alien Abductions, The Measure of a Mystery, something like that. He wrote the book Myth and Mystery of UFOs. He informed all of the priests of high strangeness because he compiled about 250 reports of abduction and did folklore analysis and established an understanding of how consistent the phenomena was, which was kind of an argumentative basis for the reality of the phenomena used by all of the priests of high strangeness, including Bigelow. But this guy has not received his due credit, let's say, by that cohort. And so I bring it forward. And in his writing, there's a chapter here called Something Yet Remains, which suggests that something yet remains to be explained with the UFO phenomena, despite all of the skeptical experiences. So we ask the question, what actually remains after this inquiry? And so for me, the study of anomalies, not UFOs, is something that remains. That quote from Kaleher about NDEs, Bigelow's National Institute for Discovery Science, and the fact they study anomalies and not UFOs or aliens is important. And I think we will understand a lot through anomalies. And I think the study of anomaly is actually a psionic skill in and of itself, and a journey that involves the imagination, fantasy, and reality. I have immense respect for Mishlove, which I shared here throughout the experience. He's evidence-based, which is something that we really need in this field. He's got this mastery of a Shambhala-like presence, which I talked about. He's got a gentle and respectful approach to conspiracies. I have respect for Robert Bigelow. And at the end of this, right, I go, wow, Bigelow is a different caliber of human, right? Different caliber of human. And sort of, I understand his motivations out of grieving for lost ones, but to go from a death of loved ones to a kind of systematic engagement of 65 mediums and 204 scholars, like, oh my God, that is a different level, and it's sort of titanic. It's titanic. And I think of him as a Promethean character, let's say. He is an experiencer. We didn't even talk about the Rogan interview with him, where he talks about his own dreams of little beings and why. Right, just as the tragic deaths and deaths in his family inspired the Institute of Consciousness Research into Survival After Death, so too did Bigelow's early dreams of little men in his room doing things to him and sightings of UFOs and things like that inspired him to do this work. And so I go, actually, if we understand that proportion, we can understand that Bigelow likely is one of the prime contactees of our world, right? And the level of tragedy for him, 2 suicides and a death of a partner, oh my God, right, inspired that drastic work. So too, I understand that there must have been a strong, possibly confusing, traumatic experience with what we call alien abduction or UFO abduction in his past. And that's my deduction here. And I respect him for working through that. So I respect him as a grieving human and as a king to whose dreams I am bound. So that will take a little bit of an explanation, but the reason why I'm doing all of this work is because I'm spiritually bound, let's say, to those dreams that are associated with him. So like this is the source of my respect, right? There's a common experience of death, of sleep paralysis per se, death and loss, powerful dreams, but his execution is absolutely uncommon. We've got unusual personal experiences as an example. We've got NIDS, we've got BAS, we've got BICS, we've got so much work, right? So that's 3 decades of active work that is really, really actually productive, right? You can actually see the productivity there. You can measure it, you can look into it, you can monitor it. There's probably tons of databases behind the scenes that if you get into, that would be so much insight and information. So the common motivations but uncommon execution is a source of my respect here of Bigelow. Bigelow for me is a king for dreamers. Bigelow as a king for dreamers. So for me, Bigelow terrifies me. It's just, he is in my dreams. He is there. If dream telepathy is real, I am perceiving him in a real way. And our relationship is in the future and in the present and in the dream world. There is an actual impact of his activities. I'm not saying I'm personally related to him, but that the activities of him in the dream world are what have created a sort of astral current for at least 12 years for me, for at least 12 years. And I there's a lot to talk about there. But I look to the prophet Daniel as a model for dream interpretation. When I go, what am I doing in this world? Is I'm doing dream interpretation like the prophet Daniel, right? So Galathog the Great charged me. He said, you are a dream interpreter for the body politic. There's only a handful of people like me who have the skills I have, who have worked through the things I've worked through, and have the capacity and the psionic skill to do what is needed in this dream interpretive expression or exploration of the missing time extraterrestrial ET NHI contact phenomena. There's only a few people that can do that, right? Hypnotists who have experience and capacity to dream and right? It's a kind of a rare combination. So Galathog says you are one of those people, and the dream interpretations you are doing are for the body politic. And who is there? Well, I sense into it, and Bigelow's deeply there. And so I need to talk about what collections of dreams are, right? They are psychic and shamanic resources with gravity and momentum and power in and of themselves, right? I have worked with databases of dreams since 2010, 2011, right? This is working with large-scale databases of dreams has an impact on me as a dreamer. They behave in strange ways. So, for example, check out the book Database of Dreams. There's kind of interesting phenomenological data about working with databases of dreams. My understanding is that they are a huge source of shamanic power that has a gravity to themselves that if you are not careful with working with them, they will destroy you, right? So that I think about some of the more nefarious activities, like say with Skinwalker and things like that. I'm curious, I go, what sort of man can hold together databases of dreams like what Bigelow has brought together? And I say that sort of man is a sort of man that is worthy of the name King of Dream Interpreters or something like that, right? So that deduction I have from what he's done with databases of dreams and dreamlike experiences and operationalizing them to such a degree as what we see with the mediumship challenge experience, I'm pretty sure that wasn't the first time he operationalized psychics, right? That wasn't the first time. And so my understanding is there's databases there Bigelow is holding, and also operational policies that have been enacted in the world. So I go, what sort of powers are unleashed there? I am very concerned about that as someone who holds 200,000 dreams in a database, who's working with it and acting with it. There is so much there, and there's so much hidden shamanic reflection of those dreams in the dream world that I myself have had to go through a transformative journey, the journey of this last year, to even approach some of these topics. I go, what has Bigelow done? Oh my God, That's the question. I deduce something has happened. This deduction also involves an understanding from Eric Wargo's time loops that reveals that NHI and UAP experiences may involve causal loops associated with media. So the fact that we have media about this, right? The 2017 New York Times article, the stuff that's coming out afterwards, the UAP disclosure stuff, all of News Nation, and who actually owns that is a question I have. But there's an understanding I have from Eric Wargo's dream loops that if we have large emotionally charged media about something, that it may have a retrocausal effect. Now, I also know that the missing time experience and the regression may have sort of causal loops too. So I wonder what actually is happening with the databases, with the psionic assets, with the operationalization of mediums and things like that. So I think there is a sort of time travel, causal time travel thing happening here that is shaping the spirit of the American people, let's say. So Bigelow's media empire is massive, and things like that. And I did talk about how a missing time regression as shamanic holds power despite truth. And so that's why when I read Unusual Personal Experiences and realized he operationalized the survey, and he also informed more than 100,000 mental health workers about it, I go, wow, this was a shamanic action, whether or not he recognized it. So my conclusion is his influence is massive. Bigelow's influence is massive. So he is in this way, it's like the craziest thing for me, but my guidance says he is like a Nebuchadnezzar to the Daniel in the Bible. Like there is, I am bound to that understanding in a way. And that's why it terrifies me every time to speak publicly about Bigelow. That's why the words I use about him are also guided by my dreams and dream connections, because I believe in that connection. I believe he's actually understanding it, but I go, there's something in between. He's understanding his own version of that, right? He's yearning to understand the phenomena. I don't think there's anything nefarious about it. I don't think there's kind of psyop elements. There are, but there aren't. And the things I was afraid of actually don't need to be afraid of them. Like he's not some evil Bill Gates with like nanobot vaccines. I don't believe that about Bill Gates either, but I explored those conspiracy type theories with Bigelow, and my spiritual conclusion here is that Bigelow and his activities and his words are like that of a king of old, for which prophetic dream interpreters come into the world through divine intervention. And in part, that's how I see my activities here. And that seems like really strange experience to admit publicly in a live stream. But so that's the adventure. This was brought to you by D-SETI, Dream Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, right? So we really just went through all of this with Dr. Mishlove talking with Danny Jones about Robert Bigelow. And I'm just going to summarize this here for you. We talked a lot about Robert Bigelow, who he is, his activities through the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, where he engaged in two projects. One is to challenge the spirit world through the systemization of 65 mediums. And the other project was to collect the best evidence for life after death from 204 scholars about this. We talked about who Jeffrey Mishlove is, the New Thinking Aloud. We talked about how there might be this movement within the field of consciousness studies where Bigelow is moving into funding consciousness studies through the RT Bigelow Educational Foundation. We talked about potential motivations for all of these movements. We talked about how Bigelow was part of the history of the UAP disclosure movement and a material cause of it through his connections with Leslie Kean, Harry Reid, being the government contractor who studied UFOs. We also explored what that actually might have looked like for him. And finally, we came to the conclusion that there is perhaps, for me, an understanding of a deep shamanic power, both in the databases that Bigelow has collected and his operationalization of that data collection and activity around that. So that actually is really important, because if we remember back to the Kona Blue slide where he says, oh, we have countermeasures we can demonstrate. We can demonstrate these countermeasures. I actually, after going through this thing, go, I'm not skeptical of that claim, actually. I'm skeptical about some interpretations probably that would support that claim, but actually there's something real that they can do. There's a capacity there that feels very real. And I would love to know what that is. I would be scared to know what that is, in fact. And the only way I would approach that knowledge is with the support of my own dream guidance, right? Because we need to move a lot of the energy of whatever's happening in UFO contact into an embodied system that integrates skeptical and credulous perspectives, rational and irrational perspectives, and ties us to the actual consciousness system we're based in. And that is based on the earth, in relationship to the sun, in relationship to so many other things, 8 billion people. There's so much happening in the subtle worlds that we don't even know from a rational perspective. That's why integral studies, that's why I'm really excited about parapsychology at CIHS. Ultimately, I'm very excited about this, and the reason why I'm bringing forward skeptical claims is because my dream guidance tells me to. We need to actually purify something before we can complete this cycle of dream interpretation that began in the 90s about alien abduction. All right, so with that, I will thank you for being here with me in this rather long presentation. And I will wish you all the best dreams and all of the power you need to interpret your own dreams and the dreams that you see supporting UFO contact narratives and UAP disclosure narratives. I hope that you have enough experiences in your life to really discern what people are talking about, because that's actually important. This is a lived experience. That's why we can turn to Bigelow's expressions about the grief of losing someone as a motivation for understanding life after death, or his own childhood experiences, right? We go, oh, there's something real over here, right? Well, there's something real there that we can really understand, and that he is actually an experiencer who's lived through stuff. That's the deduction here, and that all of the stuff that comes out of it is in part compelled by those initial experiences, in the same way that my initial experiences of, say, the Easter Bunny when I was 3, or my missing time experience when I was 20-some, those drive me forward to understand. So too, he's being driven forward to understand. So too are so many people in this field being driven forward to understand. And I yearn for a time where we can integrate these many different perspectives in a worldview that isn't challenged by objective data, but is enhanced by it. That's the thing I'm yearning for, is to say, hey, there's a group of circularly reporting individuals, whatever, but they actually integrate objective information and come back with testimonies about subjective, intersubjective, and transpersonal experiences. That's what I hope will happen in this dialogue. So once again, thanks for being here, and may you have all the best dreams, and to understand your own motivations for exploring UAP disclosure. By this merit may Allah obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy and wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara may I free all beings. Om Ahum Vajra Guru Padma Siddhi Hum.